What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Wolf's Workshop, and in this episode, I'm going to channel my inner doom. My body's ready. What's going on, guys? Marrok Wolf here, and this is Capes Revisited. So what we're doing here is we are actually going to sculpt some capes for some ogres for good old Mr. Doom and Darkness himself. So the tools that you're going to need for this is obviously green stuff, some Vaseline, an X-Acto blade, your shaping tools, and a rolling pin. So we're just getting this started off as we always do. We are going to get our green stuff ready. We're going to mix up a large amount because what we're actually going to do here is we are going to mass produce some capes. Alright, so we got our green stuff all mixed up. Got a big chunk there. Next up, we got some Vaseline. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a piece of paper towel. What we have laid down on our tabletop here is a glass cutting board, and we're just going to take some Vaseline, and we're going to put a thin layer of Vaseline all over this cutting board so that the green stuff does not stick to it. That's one of the worst things when you're doing this. If you don't lay down some Vaseline or some sculptor's lubricant, you're gonna have a bad day. When you go to pull this stuff up, it's gonna tear, it's gonna stick to everything. It's not gonna be a fun time. So make sure that your working surface is well lubricated. As you can see, I'm taking some Vaseline and I'm also putting it on the rolling pin just to be doubly safe. We don't want this thing pulling any of that green stuff up. We don't want any ripping or tearing. We want this to go smooth and not have any issues because we're going to be working on a time crunch here with all this green stuff that's mixed up. It's got a set time of 24 hours, but it starts to harden up after like 2, so you got to work fairly quickly if you're going to do this. Okay, so we got our green stuff. We're going to kind of pre-flatten it out because this stuff isn't like cookie dough. It doesn't just press down. We're going to rub it on the cutting board, make sure both sides are a little bit lubricated, and we're going to start rolling this out. We want to make sure that it's nice and flat, that you've got consistent thickness throughout. You can see already that there's a little bit of bubbling. These are air pockets from when you actually mix the green stuff together. It's not a big deal. This is a 2/3 step process. So if you have some air pockets, they are going to get covered up. You can deal with them just by going like this and rubbing your finger along and just kind of pressing them out. It's like I said, it's not a big deal at this step because we are going to be sculpting more on top, which will hide all of these little imperfections. So yeah, we're gonna roll that out, make sure everything's consistent, and then we'll move on to the next step. So we've made sure everything is consistent thickness. We're gonna grab one of our ogres here just for size reference to make sure that we're not making the capes too big or too small. Take your X-Acto blade, a little bit of water on the blade, and we're gonna cut out the basic shape of a cape. What you're going to notice is that I'm not cutting it right out of the center. I'm staying close to the edge. This is because we're going to do multiple capes out of this one piece of green stuff. So we're just going to carefully cut out the basic shape of the cape. Basic rectangle shape. We're going to do some little tears at the bottom because ogres don't take care of their stuff. Don't be too worried about getting fingerprints and stuff in it either, like if the stuff's moving. Man, Marrok, get your goddamn head out of the way. Just awful. As a side note, this is like incredibly awkward to record. So yeah, we're just cutting in tears and stuff, and yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it there. So once you got everything all cut out, you want to make sure your edges are super clean, so when you go to pull it up, you don't have any problems. Vaseline's going to help here too, because it's not going to stick to our cutting board. And we're just going to peel it out. Our little tears at the bottom there are going to stick because it's a lot of cuts in one area. It's easy to trim though. Again, we're not too worried about putting fingerprints in this stuff because we're going to lay it down on the miniature and smooth everything out anyways. And we're also going to be sculpting on top of this once it's laid down as well. So not a huge deal. Alright, so we're going to grab our ogre. After we get her all cut out here, we're going to lay this down on the ogre. Make sure it is positioned correctly where we want it. Grab our clay shaper, and we're going to press on and make sure this green stuff is good and attached. Might take a couple tries. There is Vaseline on this. Important note, if you're gonna like paint after this, make sure you give them a nice warm soapy wash before you lay paint down on this, or it's just gonna wipe off. So come on, man, this is amateur hour. Focus. There we go. Alright, so again, pressing green stuff in. We're just kind of pushing it around, making sure it's attached. It's not going to fall off when we go to do our other sculpting. Nice thing about these ogres too is that they got these great like muscly backs that are really easy to just kind of follow along with when you're putting your initial like creases and stuff into the cape. It's really easy to follow the contours of their back and just kind of like add those folds in there. It's like tracing almost. It's pretty fantastic. So here we're just pressing more into the green stuff, following the muscles in this guy's back. We want it to make sure that it looks draped. This is also going to be our guideline for later when we go to sculpt on top of this, when we add green stuff on top of it to get those folds and stuff in there to make the cape look a lot more dynamic than it does now. And then once you've got everything, your first pass kind of done, we're going to go in and we're going to press even harder to sort of accentuate those folds even more. So you can see I'm actually using the tip of the sculpting tool now instead of the side, and we're just really pressing in there to show off where those folds are going to go and give us some real definition in the long run of like just how sort of billowy and foldy these cloaks are. So once you've got enough capes cut out, you'll have something that looks like this. So all you got to do is pull it up, mix it back together. This can be a little bit tougher depending on how much time you spent cutting those capes and that out. It's not a huge deal though, you just got to muscle through. And then we're just gonna roll this back out onto the table, and we're gonna continue cutting capes from it. And when you've got all your ogre's base capes on, it should look something like this, where everything's kind of nicely draped over top. It's nice and thin. It's a great groundwork to work on top of, and we're gonna get into that right smartly here. So that's just a front view of what they look like, and here's a view from the back. As you can see, we really etched in following the contours of the muscles of the miniatures, and these are going to be guidelines for us to go back in and sculpt on top of. If you don't feel like doing that, you could probably end it right here and this would be good enough. But we're going to take it a step further and we're going to do some sculpting on top. So after your green stuff is all set, all you got to do is take a small cylinder of green stuff, place it onto the cape where you want your crease to be. So I'm picking here on the arm. And then we're going to take our flat clay shaping tool and we're going to press it into that cloak, and we're going to make sure the most important step happens, where you put this thing on, you're going to press it into the cloak, but you need to make sure that the edges of your green stuff are blended right into that cloak. Because if you don't, those lines are going to show up in the paint job afterwards, and it's just not going to be a good day. Now, if you can't get your blends perfect at this step, what you can do afterwards is you can come in and you can actually just take like a really fine grain of sandpaper and you can sand it out. And that will give you the smooth edge that you want. And then you're just, after that first one's done, you're just gonna repeat the process, and we're gonna add more folds onto this cloak. Same basic concept. We're gonna press it in, we're gonna make sure our edges are all blended out, and yeah, that's basically it. Two-step process and your capes are done. You really want to make sure that you don't like try and do this step on top of the other step before the green stuff is set. Wait a day, let it set, and you won't have any issues. So again, you're just going to repeat putting more and more cylinders of green stuff on here to accentuate the folds until you like the look of it, and that is at your own discretion. Just make sure your edges are blended or it'll look terrible when you paint it. So once you've got the bulk of your folds in, we still have some more work to do on this guy, but I just wanted to show you how you can distress a cape super easy. So we're just going to take a pin, and what we're going to do is we're just going to stab it into the green stuff. Literally just poke it in there. That's what she said. And then you're going to pull down. And what this does is it creates like a little fold. So what you can do is you can kind of feather this out, and then you can go in with your flat clay shaper, and you can kind of fold this down, smooth it out, kind of push it around a bit, and eventually what you end up with is a hole that actually has a piece of torn cloth underneath it. And it looks alright, and it helps give some character to a bland, flat, billowy cape, which is cool. So yeah, I'm just gonna do it again here. Again, we're just kind of stabbing the green stuff in and then pulling down and putting a little tear hole in there. And yeah, it's literally that simple. It's pretty easy. And when you're all done, it should look something like this, where you've got these nice folds, some distress work, and yeah, just looks pretty good. And wait a minute, is that a hood? So if you want to put a hood on your guy to add to the cape and cloak, what you're going to do is you're going to take a thin cylinder of green stuff and you're going to put it across this guy's forehead. Pretty simple. The reason why we're not covering this guy's entire head in green stuff is because that can really mess with the proportions of the miniatures. So you could end up with a guy whose head is way bigger than what it is supposed to be. And if you do it this way and you just sort of blend it into his head that's already there, you don't end up with that problem. So yeah. So again, we're just blending edges here, pushing it around. What is eventually going to happen is we are going to go back in and sort of make sure that the edges around the face and where the hood starts is well defined, because there's nothing worse than trying to paint a model with muddy details. So we're just going to blend the edges into the head, take a look at it, make sure everything's good. We're going to go in with a pin, we're going to accentuate the edge, make sure that it is clearly defined where the face ends and the hood starts. And it's around this point that I realized that I didn't put enough green stuff on this guy for this hood. So we're gonna tear off a little bit more and we're just gonna add it on top of what we've already laid down. And we're gonna blend that right in there as well. Once I got everything all blended together, I'm just going in with my flat-headed clay shaper, and again, I'm just making sure that that edge is there. I'm also taking this opportunity to shape the flow of the cape of the hood to make sure it looks right when it's how it's draped over the top of this guy's dome. And yeah, so we're just accentuating the edge, making sure the shape is all correct, and then we're gonna go back in and we're going to clean it up some more to make sure that all of our edges are all clean. So it's super important to use the right tool for the right job. So now I'm using the cone clay shaper, and with this one what I'm doing is I'm just kind of pulling the hood around and under his chin, following the edge of where the inside of the hood meets his face. And yeah, so we're just making sure that those edges are super crisp and clean, and that the hood is making it all the way underneath his chin. And now we're going to sculpt the back of the hood. So we're just going to take another small cylinder of green stuff, and we're going to lay it on the back of this guy's head. What we're going to do here is we're going to blend it into the top of his head. We're going to make sure that the crease between where the hood ends and the cape starts is well defined and has a nice crisp edge to it, so that that edge is clearly defined. When you look at cloaks like this in comic books, in other miniatures, a lot of the time it is there's a lot of creases that are around the neck where the hood meets the cloak itself. So we want to make sure that we capture that as well. So we're going to make sure that that edge is super well defined. We're going to put a little bit of a point on the end of the hood as well. Not super pointy like Night Goblin-y, but enough to know that that is where the tip of the hood is. And in order to do that, we're just going to take our clay shaper and we're going to kind of press it in. You can see I'm doing it right here. We're just going to press it in, and then we're going to blend everything out afterwards. Again, we don't want a silly, like, super pointy hood tip. We just want one that's sort of round and flowy like the rest of this is supposed to be. We want to make sure that it fits in with the aesthetic of everything else. So again, we're just taking our clay shaper and we're just kind of pushing the green stuff around, making sure we got that nice hood tip, and making sure that the edge of that hood is well defined. So you can see we got a super sharp line there, and that's what it should look like when you're done. Here's just another example. And when you're done putting cloaks on your ogres, they should look like this. I hope that this helped you guys sculpt some cloaks for any and all of your miniatures. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to watch this tutorial. And I will catch you guys on the next one.